Why couldn't anyone get that dog out of there? The sun had barely risen over the horizon when the silence of the cemetery was broken, not by tears, nor by words of farewell, but by the simple presence of a dog. He was there, motionless, lying next to a coffin covered in the American flag. It was as if his body knew that there was still a duty to fulfill, even after death. The coffin belonged to a war veteran, a man who served his country with honor, but who left without ceremony, without crowds, without public commotion. Only that dog knew the size of the loss, and he wouldn't let his owner go alone. Maybe you've never seen anything like it. Maybe you think it's exaggerated. But what happened that morning was not a simple funeral. It was a silent protest, a cry of loyalty that no human could silence. The dog, an old German shepherd with a tired look, resisted any attempt to move away. Not the guard soldiers, not the cemetery employees, not even the chaplaincy's appeals. He stood there, like a sentry, like a soldier on guard duty, in complete silence. Have you ever felt like someone who should be remembered was being forgotten? That a true hero was being buried as if his life had been small, unimportant? It's a strange feeling. A mix of sadness and anger. That's exactly what some veterans who were present felt. They didn't know him well. Some might not even remember his name. But it was enough to see that dog there, clinging to the coffin, for something to awaken inside them. This kind of story, a faithful dog, a lonely veteran, a silent cemetery, may seem like something out of a movie. But there is something very real about this pain. Something that touches deep. Because she reminds us of an uncomfortable truth. True heroes often leave in silence. And the world, too busy with its distractions, often doesn't notice. As time passed, and the body was still not taken to the tomb, the atmosphere in the place began to change. Some present exchanged glances, others approached in silence. The dog trembled slightly, but did not give in. It was as if he was saying, "Not like this. Not like this. Not alone." What you discover now may surprise you, because this simple funeral would soon turn into something much bigger. Something that no one there expected. A gesture of loyalty that would spark a movement. A protest that would start with a dog and end with veterans across the country raising their voices. Stay with me, because what happens next will shake you in ways you may not be prepared for. But it is necessary, because certain stories cannot be forgotten, and certain heroes cannot be buried in silence. Time seemed frozen that morning. The cold wind cut through the clothes of the few present, but no one moved. The footsteps that would normally echo between the tombstones were suspended in the air, as if the cemetery itself knew something was wrong there. The dog still lying down, eyes fixed on the coffin. He didn't wag his tail. I didn't cry. I didn't ask for help. It just existed, in that space between pain and resistance, as if saying to the world, "You have forgotten him, but I have not." One of the soldiers present, already elderly, with his chest marked by old medals and a look hardened by time, discreetly let a tear fall. He hadn't cried in years. Not even at the birth of grandchildren. Not even at the funerals of war friends. But that scene, that dog lying next to what was left of a man invisible to society, that was too much. He walked over, knelt down, and whispered something no one heard. And then he stood next to the dog, in silence. Others began to do the same. First, one, then two. No words, no orders, no speeches. It was as if something ancient had been awakened there. The pain of being forgotten, the guilt of having survived, the longing for times when the uniform was still a symbol of respect, and not out of indifference. At this point in the story, you may be feeling a tightness in your chest. Maybe I remembered someone, or asked how we let this happen. If this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what touched you most. Your voice matters, because when we share, we transform this pain into a living memory. And stories like this need to be remembered. They need to be felt. Not just for those who lived, but for everyone who still has the heart to listen. If you've come this far, it's because you feel something true. So enjoy this video. It's not just a click. It's a way of saying, I care. This is how the algorithm understands that this story deserves to be spread, that this veteran will not be forgotten. And if this isn't the first time you felt this way here on the channel, maybe it's time to subscribe. It's free, but the impact is immense. Each new subscriber is a sign that there are still people who value courage, loyalty, and dignity. And they want to continue listening to voices that have almost become silent. But the story doesn't end here, because something even more unexpected was about to happen. His name was Walter Griggs. Few knew. In the neighborhood where I lived, it was just the old man on the corner with the quiet dog. Most saw him passing by with slow steps, wearing the same old coat, hat low on his head, and a lost look that rarely looked at anyone head on. The dog, always at your side, obedient, loyal. To his neighbors, he was just another lonely elderly man trying to survive. But no one knew, or cared to know, who he had really been. Decades earlier, Walter was a sergeant in the Marine Corps. He served in 2 combat missions, went through conflicts in the Middle East, and had his name written in reports that few civilians ever read. He was decorated for bravery in saving 4 comrades in a night attack in Kandahar. The kind of feat that earns headlines, tributes, statues. But that, for him, only brought scars. Scars that didn't appear on the body, but were there, deep, pulsing, every day. When he returned, there was no applause. There was no family waiting at the gate. Just silence and bills. Civil reality was much crueler than any warfield. Temporary jobs, distrust in interviews, strange looks when he got irritated by sudden noises or withdrew in the supermarket. The scars of post-traumatic stress have made him invisible. Their requests for help in the health system were answered with paperwork, bureaucracy, and half-open doors that never really opened wide. For years, he lived in the same small rented house, with little furniture, limited food, and an old television that was turned on more for company than for interest. His only affection was Max, the German shepherd he adopted as a puppy. A silent but powerful gift. Max didn't ask questions. I didn't judge. It just stayed there. He was the only living being who looked at Walter as someone who still mattered. Morning walks were sacred. Not for the exercise, but because they were the only time Walter felt part of something. He observed the sidewalks, the trees, the people. Nobody noticed him, but he noticed everything. His eyes held the kind of wisdom you don't learn from books. It was the look of someone who saw the war and came back. Not whole, but it came back. Once, on a winter afternoon, Walter tried to enter a public hospital feeling severe chest pains. You waited for hours. When he was finally seen, the doctor didn't even look at his military records. He felt like a number, not as someone who served honorably. At the end of that month, he wrote a letter that was never sent. In it, he said, "The hardest part wasn't killing. It was coming back and realizing that no one cared if I was alive." This letter was found after his death, in a drawer next to Max's collar. The words were written in shaky handwriting, but carried an almost unbearable force. A silent plea for recognition, for dignity. But it came too late. On the day of his death, there was no grand ceremony. Just a notice printed on plain paper, taped to the building's door. Walter Griggs, veteran, died on Tuesday. Burial reserved. No newspaper published it, no authorities attended, just Max, the dog who, lying next to the coffin, seemed to understand everything the world chose to ignore. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happened next revealed a hidden truth about the impact that a silent gesture can have. When a simple dog refuses to abandon its owner, what is it saying, without words, to an entire society? Comment there. This should not be forgotten. The sky was cloudy, as if even it was ashamed to shine that day. The procession moved slowly. There was no band. There were no speeches. Just the creaking of the hearse's wheels and the sound of the heavy footsteps of 2 National Guard soldiers, assigned to fulfill a duty that seemed more mechanical than human. The American flag, folded into a triangle, rested on the coffin as a last attempt at dignity. But that wasn't enough. Not for those who lived, fought, suffered, and died forgotten. The still wet grass made the shoes of the few present sink slightly with each step. And, among these silent presences, there he was. Max. The dog. The only one who seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. The only one who treated Walter's body with the reverence of someone who still believed in honor. Since the coffin was placed on the stand in the floor, Max hasn't left the side. He sat firmly, with his chest puffed out and his eyes fixed on what was left of his best friend. The tension was visible. The chaplain, a middle-aged man with a tired voice, hesitated with the Bible in his hands. I tried to start the rite, but it was as if the words wouldn't come out. Maybe it was because of the dog's steady gaze. Maybe because of the absence of familiar faces. Maybe because he realized that, despite being there, no one really knew the man inside that coffin. The seconds passed like hours, and the discomfort grew. One of the soldiers whispered something into the radio. The other, younger one, kept his eyes fixed on Max, as if trying to decipher what that animal wanted to say. The gravedigger, in a hurry, took a step forward. "We need to keep going," he murmured, without facing anyone directly. It was just another service, another body. One more number at the end of the afternoon. He advanced with the intention of driving the dog away. But Max growled. Not in an aggressive way. It was a warning. A kind of dull scream, full of pain and instinct. The soldiers retreated. The chaplain closed his eyes. Nobody knew what to do. There was no protocol for this. The hidden truth that moment revealed is that behind every forgotten ceremony, there is an untold story. There are behind the scenes of a life of pain, memories that do not fit into empty tributes. Walter had no flowers. There were no grandchildren placing letters on the coffin. There were no hymns. There was Max. And perhaps that said more about him than any medal. The moral pain that hovered in the environment was almost physical. The few who were there, 2 neighbors, a former colleague from the veterans group, a nurse who saw him once in the emergency room, observed everything in absolute silence. Each one dealing with the guilt of not having done more, of having ignored signs, of not having asked if he needed anything. The transformation at that moment was not in what was said, but in what was felt. It was a collective, silent, bitter mourning. A mourning that was not just for Walter, but for all the others who passed away like this, without being seen. The emotional impact took shape in the breathlessness of one of the veterans present. A man with a mechanical leg, leaning on a cane, looked at Max and then at the coffin. Without saying anything, he took a step forward and knelt down. He touched the dark wood with his fingertips. His eyes were wet. His voice cracked. "Sorry, brother. You shouldn't have left alone." It was enough to break what remained of the formality. The chaplain closed the book. The younger soldier dropped his rigid posture and turned his back, wiping away his tears. The gravedigger took 2 steps back. And Max lay next to the coffin, as he did in the late afternoons, on the porch of the house, when the world finally fell a little silent. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because this silent farewell, marked by absence and pain, was about to provoke an unexpected reaction. And it would all start with those who least expected it. Write in the comments. He was not forgotten. The silence was broken not by screams, but by a dry, deep sound. Max's growl. When the gravedigger reached out to pull him by the collar, the dog didn't just move away. He threw himself onto the coffin, grabbing with his teeth a corner of the American flag that covered his owner's body. It was a quick moment, but filled with absurd intensity. The cloth stretched tightly, the choked bark echoed between the tombstones, and, for a moment, all the air seemed to be sucked out of that place. It was as if the animal was saying, with its entire body, that this was a mistake, that this man did not deserve to be buried like this. The gravedigger backed away, eyes wide. One of the soldiers stepped forward, instinctively reaching for his holster. But before anything worse could happen, a deep voice cut through the air. "Don't touch him!" He was the veteran with the cane, the one who had knelt moments before. He was standing now, supported with difficulty, but with a hard, determined face. "This cub is more of a soldier than most men who have ever worn a uniform." The impact of this phrase fell like an emotional bomb among those present. An even denser silence ensued. And then, unexpectedly, another man, a bold ex-Marine in a faded denim jacket, stepped forward slowly and stood beside the dog. "If he doesn't leave, neither will I." It didn't take long for another veteran, wearing a red beret, to approach as well. "We are together." Within minutes, a semicircle of men formed, many of them advanced in age, some in old uniforms, others with visible scars on their faces and hands. Everyone positioned themselves around the coffin like a living wall. More a silent, but unbreakable protest. The ceremony, once cold and hurried, now seemed suspended in time. No authority knew how to act. The chaplain put down the book and let the moment take its own course. The gravedigger called the administration, asking for instructions. And meanwhile, Max lay down again on the coffin, with his head resting on the wooden chest as if he felt his owner's heart beating inside. Some present began to cry. It wasn't just about Walter anymore. It was about everyone who was ignored, about the invisible scars, about the journey so many veterans face after returning home and realizing that the war never truly ends. It was about abandonment disguised as normality. The hidden truth is that many of them continue to fight every day in silence with dignity. And sometimes all they ask is not to be forgotten. Hours passed and no one moved. Night was beginning to fall when a city car arrived at the cemetery. A local government representative had been informed of the confusion and was sent to resolve the situation. Wearing a dark jacket and with a tablet in his hand, he approached with cautious steps, trying to understand what had happened. But it was enough to look around, the closed faces, the red eyes, the dog still lying on the coffin, to realize that this wasn't just an interrupted ceremony. It was a declaration of loyalty. It was about honor, about respect, and about a decision that no one was willing to go back on. He tried to argue. He spoke about regulations, burial schedules, cemetery commitments, but no one responded. No voice faced him, because it wasn't necessary. The strength of that collective silence was greater than any argument. He hesitated, took a step back, and finally gave in. The decision to stop the burial was spontaneous. There was no planning. It was a visceral human reaction, filled with a mentality that many had already buried, along with those who were lost. The idea that each life has value, that each story matters, and that no one who fought for freedom deserves to be placed underground without a dignified farewell. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic. Because what started with a dog enduring the pain of loss was about to turn into something much bigger. Something even the veterans themselves couldn't imagine. Comment: that really touched me. The next morning, an image began circulating on social media. It was simple, raw, without filters or retouching. A dog lying on a coffin covered with an American flag, surrounded by elderly men with steady gazes and tired postures. There were no subtitles. There was no need for them. All you had to do was look at it to understand that it was bigger than any caption could explain. Within hours, the photo spread like wildfire. First in veterans groups, then in patriotic pages, until it reached national newspapers and TV stations. Max's face became a symbol of something that no one could immediately name, but that everyone felt: guilt. The truth exploded on the screens. War veteran is buried without family, but his dog refuses to leave him. Dog interrupts burial and forces military personnel to review ceremony. Who was Walter Griggs? The headlines varied, but the impact was the same. In every corner of the country, people began to ask, how did we let this happen? How did we allow a man who defended our flag to die in oblivion? Why do we need a dog to remind us of dignity? Radio programs opened live lines to hear from veterans, neighbors, doctors, and anyone who had something to say about Walter. Stories began to emerge. A mechanic said that the old man always stopped by his workshop and asked to use the phone. A market attendant recalled that he always bought the same items: rice, beans, food, and sliced bread. Nothing more. Everything counted. Everything exact. An emergency room doctor revealed that he had already been treated for severe chest pain, but did not want to be hospitalized. He said that Max could not sleep alone. Commotion took over the country. Some people cried without even knowing the exact reason. It was as if Walter was a reflection of a painful truth, that we are surrounded by invisible heroes, people who live in silence, who carry heavy memories, who were shaped by sacrifice, and who, in the end, just wanted to be remembered. The emotional journey that image triggered crossed borders. A group of veterans in Texas organized a symbolic ceremony in Walter's honor. Others did the same in Ohio, North Carolina, Arizona. His name, previously forgotten, became a flag. Literally. Some schools printed Max's photo and hung it on bulletin boards. Teachers used the story to talk about honor, empathy, citizenship. It was as if, suddenly, a collective wound had been exposed, and everyone felt part of the debt. In the midst of this turmoil, the cemetery where Walter was buried began to receive constant visitors. People with flowers, people with cards, children accompanied by parents. The tomb, once simple, gained a wooden enclosure. A small plaque with his full name, dates, and a handwritten phrase: "He was not forgotten." Max was still there. Not every day, but it always came back. And when he arrived, he lay down next to the tombstone as before. It was the same silence, the same vigil. But now he was no longer alone. The transformation that this story caused was not just in the funeral schedule. It was in the mentality of a people. How we look at the wrinkled faces that slowly cross the street. How we listen to the stories of those who came before. How we value the invisible. Because the hidden truth is that for every Walter who makes headlines, there are hundreds who are still sitting on silent porches, waiting for a gesture of recognition. Some began visiting shelters, looking for senior dogs to adopt. Others volunteered at veterans' nursing homes. Not out of pity, but for awakening. Walter and Max's story became a kind of emotional mirror, reflecting our failures and, at the same time, offering a chance for a fresh start. And perhaps this is the biggest impact of all this. The chance to do things differently. To look around more carefully. Remember that every decision, no matter how small it may seem, carries human value. And that no story is too small to be told. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because from this unexpected movement, something even bigger began to take shape. A change that would unite people, stories and memories that seemed buried by time, but were about to resurface with force. Comment: this story woke me up. This time, the sky was clear. The sun gently touched the faces of those who arrived, as if time itself had finally understood the value of that moment. There was no more rush, no forced silence, no embarrassing absence. What was once a mostly secret burial now became a public ceremony. A solemn procession was forming at the entrance to the cemetery, and in front of him, marching slowly, was Max. The same dog that had refused to leave the coffin now walked beside him, wearing a different collar. It wasn't leather or nylon. It was made with service medals, carefully sewn one by one, donated by veterans who heard the story, and decided to honor the one who left without the recognition he deserved. The coffin, restored and decorated with white flowers and folded flags, was no longer just a wooden object. It was a symbol. It was a banner of honor being carried by 6 veterans, all in absolute silence, but with teary eyes and puffed-out chests. Each of them had their own story, your own wounds. But there, at that moment, everything converged on one name: Walter Griggs. On the sides of the path, civilians stood with their hands on their chests. Some held American flags, others photographs. But many just watched with respect, with pain, and above all, with shame. Because they knew they were there not just to honor Walter, but to try to right a wrong that shouldn't have happened. It was the kind of gesture that doesn't erase the past, but transforms the present. And that's how a memory breathes again. The journey to the tomb was now accompanied by a group of veteran motorcyclists wearing vests emblazoned with coats of arms, driving their Harley-Davidsons at idle. The roar of the engines, which normally symbolizes strength, sounded like lament. It was the march of the forgotten being remembered. And when the procession arrived at the exact place where Walter had been buried days before, there was no room for more regrets. There was only room to do it right. Max was the first to approach the tombstone. He stopped in front of it, looked at the tomb as if he understood everything that was happening, and then, slowly, he lay down on the earth. That gesture, repeated so many times since the first ceremony, now took on another meaning. It was no longer resistance, it was rest. A type of peace that only those who are faithful to the end can experience. The chaplain, the same as before, now with a firm voice and red eyes, gave the speech that he was unable to complete on the first attempt. He spoke of loyalty, of values, the importance of remembering who built what we have. But the most touching moment came when he read, in front of everyone, the letter that Walter never managed to send, the one that was found in the drawer, next to the collar. The hardest part wasn't killing. It was coming back and realizing that no one cared if I was alive. There was a profound silence, and then, spontaneously, the audience began to applaud. Nobody asked, nobody commanded. But everyone knew that applause was an apology. It was a late but necessary recognition. Behind the scenes of this new ceremony, there was a group of volunteers taking care of the logistics. Young scouts served water to the older ones. A choir of students prepared to sing the national anthem. Everything had been organized by people who didn't even know Walter when he was alive. But touched by the hidden truth revealed by the image of a dog on a coffin, they decided that he would no longer be one of many. He would be remembered. He would have his last leap of honor. And that's exactly what happened. When the choir started to sing, everyone stood up. Even wheelchair users made an effort to stand up. The motorcyclists took off their helmets. The group of veterans saluted. And Max just closed his eyes. Not as someone who sleeps, but as someone who finally finds rest. At that moment, there was no more suffering. There was memory. There was unity. There was justice. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the repercussion of this farewell was so intense that something unexpected began to happen in several parts of the country. Something that would show that, sometimes, a single story can change many others. Comment. This tribute moved me. After that ceremony, nothing was the same as before. Walter's grave, which until recently was just one tombstone among thousands, has become an almost sacred meeting point for veterans, students, entire families. People crossed entire cities just to stay there for a few minutes in silence, as if that piece of land had become a mirror of our collective consciousness. Many arrived with their eyes downcast. Some cried without explanation. Others just placed their hand on the cold stone and left. But there was something in common in everyone who passed by. A mixture of regret and reverence, as if they finally understood the dimension of what they had ignored for so long. Max, in turn, did not return to sleeping on the ground as he did before. He now had a new home. He was adopted by a family of veterans who received him with honors, as if they were welcoming the last guardian of a history that needed to be preserved. The collar made of metals was still around his neck, and even though he was older and had slower steps, he seemed to carry within himself the responsibility of keeping Walter's memory alive. He had become a symbol, a living reminder, a presence that still said, without words, "I have not forgotten." Max's new family was made up of 3 generations of veterans, a grandfather who served in Vietnam, a father who was in Iraq, and a son who had just returned from Afghanistan. They had already buried friends. They knew the weight of longing. But with Max at home, something different happened. The conversations deepened. Stories that were previously locked away began to emerge at the breakfast table. The pain began to transform into a narrative, into a teaching. Because there is something powerful about sharing suffering. It stops being a lonely burden and becomes a bridge. The story of Walter and Max, now known throughout the country, began to have a ripple effect. In schools, children wrote letters to local veterans. In hospitals, doctors started asking more questions. In churches, prayers were said not only for soldiers who are at war, but for those who returned from it. The invisible journey of those who carry silent traumas began to be discussed. And this change in mentality, subtle but profound, was born from a simple gesture: a dog that refused to leave a coffin. For months, documentaries were made, texts published, tributes paid. But nothing seemed to be more impactful than a stranger's silent visit to the tomb. It was common to see an elderly person leaning there, silent, sometimes with a cane, sometimes with a faded military cap, often with tears in their eyes. They were men and women who saw themselves in Walter, who recognized in their history the echo of their own loneliness, of their own oblivion. It was as if they were saying, "You've been seen. I want to be seen too." The truth is that the legacy that remains is not just in the decorated tomb, nor in the old headlines or in the images that went viral. He is in the real, deep human impact. It is in the way we start to look at others, how we learn to listen. As we understand that there are wars that continue even when the shooting stops. The backstage of this story is made up of unspoken pain, difficult decisions, emotional survival. But it is also made of beauty. Because when memory becomes action, pain finds purpose. And when even a dog refuses to forget a hero, what does that say about us? Walter and Max's legacy is a living answer to a question the world needs to hear more of. What do we do with those who gave everything for us? Do we ignore it? Did we forget? Or do we finally place them where they always belong? At the center of our gratitude. Because it's not about politics. It's not about war. It's about humanity. About honor. About responsibility. It's about not allowing courage to be buried in silence. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because even after all this, the biggest impact was yet to come. Something that would go beyond tributes and memories, to directly touch the way we treat life, death, and what it means to truly belong. Comment there. Memory is also an act of courage. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something inside. And perhaps, like me, you also believe that certain memories cannot be erased. They need to be told, felt, honored. So, if this made sense to you, if at any point you felt a lump in your throat, a shiver, or simply stopped to think, leave a comment below with the phrase, "I don't forget those who served." This way, I will know that you stayed until the end, and that this story also impacted you. Take advantage and subscribe to the channel here. Whenever we share stories like this, it is with an open heart and the intention of provoking reflection. If this type of content is good for you, transforms you, or helps you see the world with more empathy, you'll feel at home here. Oh, and leave a like too. Not only because it helps the video, but because it strengthens this space where we choose to remember instead of ignoring it. There's a video next door that continues in the same vein. Click and come with me. There's more powerful history waiting for you.